You set an alarm last night, you woke up this morning, checked your phone, scrolled for a few minutes, made coffee, and started your day. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you probably felt like you weren't being productive enough. Like you should be doing more. Like time was slipping away. But here's the thing. For almost all of human history, that feeling didn't exist. Because your ancestors were not doing more. They were doing almost nothing. And that changes everything you think you know about what it means to be human. Imagine you could step back 100,000 years. Not to ancient Egypt, not to Rome. Way further. To a small group of early Homo sapiens somewhere on the African savannah. No city, no calendar, no to-do list. What would you actually see them doing? The answer, according to decades of anthropological research, might genuinely surprise you. You would see a lot of sitting, a lot of talking, some grooming, a little bit of walking, some laughing, a fire burning low at night, and you would see children running, playing, doing absolutely nothing useful by modern standards. What you would not see is hustle. What you would not see is an 8-hour workday. Anthropologist Marshall Sahlins was one of the first researchers to challenge the assumption that early humans lived in constant, desperate struggle. In his landmark 1966 essay, later expanded into a full study, Sahlins described hunter-gatherer societies as the original affluent societies. Not wealthy in the material sense. Wealthy in something more fundamental, time. His research showed that many hunter-gatherer groups worked an average of just 3 to 5 hours per day to meet all their needs. Food, shelter, warmth, done. The rest of the day was theirs. 3 to 5 hours, think about that. Your brain is still running that old operating system, and yet the world you live in now demands 10 times that. So what did they do with all that time? Researchers who have studied surviving hunter-gatherer communities, groups like the Ikongsan of the Kalahari or the Hadza of Tanzania, have found strikingly consistent patterns. People rested during the heat of the day. They groomed each other, which in primate societies is a deeply social act, not mere hygiene. They told stories. Evolutionary biologist Robin Dunbar famously argued that language itself evolved not to share information, but to replace grooming, to maintain social bonds across larger groups. Gossip, in other words, may be one of the oldest human technologies. They played. Adults played too, not in the structured, competitive, scheduled way you might think of play now, just loosely, freely, with no outcome required. There is growing evidence from researchers like Peter Gray, a developmental psychologist at Boston College, that this kind of unstructured, self-directed play is essential to psychological health, and that its disappearance from modern adult life may explain a great deal about why so many people feel hollow despite having everything they need. They made things, slowly, deliberately. A spear tip shaped over the course of an afternoon, a strand of grass woven into something without a name, not because there was a deadline, not because someone was watching, but because the act of making was itself satisfying. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying what he called flow, the mental state of being completely absorbed in a meaningful task. Hunter-gatherers may have lived in something close to that state most of the time, not because life was easy, but because almost everything they did was direct, visible, and tangible. You hunted, you ate, you built, you rested. The feedback was immediate. The purpose was never abstract. Now consider your day, the emails you send that disappear into an inbox, the reports no one reads, the meetings about meetings, the sense that you worked hard but produced nothing you can point to. Your brain is ancient. It was built to reward the making of something real, and modern life has quietly severed that connection. But do not romanticize the past too quickly. Ancient life was not a paradise. It was also short, violent in ways that were casual and constant. Infant mortality was staggering. You could be killed by an animal, a rival group, an infected cut. Researcher Lawrence Keeley, in his book Analyzing Archaeological Evidence of Prehistoric Warfare, found that the rate of death by violence in prehistoric societies was far higher per capita than in most modern nations. Safety was never guaranteed. Security was fragile. The low-stress image of sitting by a fire is real. But so is the fact that the person sitting next to you might not be there next month. And yet, within that fragile life, there was something that is genuinely hard to find now. Presence. Your ancestors were not mentally elsewhere. They were not scrolling through a feed of other people's lives, while physically sitting next to their family. They were there. Fully. Because there was nowhere else to be. because the moment in front of them was the only moment that existed. Neuroscientists studying the default mode network, the part of the brain that activates when your mind wanders, have found that modern humans spend roughly 47% of their waking hours thinking about something other than what they are currently doing. A 2010 Harvard study, led by Matthew Killingsworth, found a direct link between mind wandering and unhappiness. The more your mind drifted from the present, the worse you felt. Your ancestors almost certainly did not have this problem, not because they were wiser, but because their world did not give them the option. The food question is worth pausing on too, because you probably imagine your ancestors spending most of their day in frantic search of food, running across plains, desperately hunting. But the evidence tells a different story. The Hadza, one of the last truly wild hunter-gatherer populations studied extensively by researchers like Frank Marlowe, have been observed to spend an average of around 4 hours per day in food-related activity. Men hunt, women gather tubers, berries, honey, and on many days, nobody hunts at all. If yesterday's hunt was successful, today is a rest day. If the berry bushes are full, 2 hours is enough. Fasting was common, not as a health trend, but as a natural rhythm. Feast and rest. Move and recover. Your body still remembers this pattern. It is why intermittent fasting feels oddly natural to so many people. Once they try it, you are not doing something new. You are returning to something very old. Sleep was different too. Completely different. Researchers Jerome Siegel and Gandhi Yetish studied 3 hunter-gatherer populations across Africa and South America, measuring their sleep with wrist monitors. What they found dismantled a central myth of modern wellness culture. These groups did not sleep 8 hours straight. They slept in 2 segments, sometimes 3. They stayed up for hours after dark, talking by firelight. They woke in the night, rested quietly, then drifted off again. Your sleeplessness at 2 in the morning may not be a disorder. It may be your body doing exactly what it was designed to do, in a world that no longer has space for it. Children were not schooled. They were not taught in the structured, age-segregated, curriculum-driven way you were. They learned by watching, by doing, by being allowed to fail in low-stakes environments. Anthropologists studying childhood in hunter-gatherer communities consistently find that children are granted extraordinary autonomy. Peter Gray's cross-cultural research shows they spend most of the day in mixed-age play groups, acquiring skills not through instruction, but through observation and imitation. There were no classrooms. There was just life, visible and learnable, happening all around them. The old and the young were not separated either. There was no retirement, no nursing home, no age-segregated social world. Grandmothers, in particular, played a role that researchers like Kristen Hawkes have studied in depth. The grandmother hypothesis suggests that postmenopausal women became one of the key drivers of human survival. By helping provision grandchildren, freeing younger women to have more children sooner, older women increased the odds that their genetic line would continue. Wisdom was not marginalized, it was essential. Age was not something to hide from. It was something that earned you a central place at the fire. So here is what your ancient day actually looked like. You woke with the light. You ate if there was food. You moved, unhurried, through your landscape. You talked, you laughed. You fixed a tool, or wove something, or shaped something slowly with your hands. You rested in the heat. You played with children without watching the clock. You groomed someone you loved. You gathered around a fire after dark. You told a story. You slept when your body said to sleep. You woke in the night and lay quietly in the dark and listened to the sounds around you. Then you slept again. That is what you were built for, not the inbox, not the commute, not the calendar full of obligations that stretch out to the horizon with no visible end. The strange thing is that you already know this. You feel it on vacation, the first real vacation, when you finally stop checking your phone and sit somewhere with no agenda. You feel it when you cook a meal from scratch and eat it slowly. You feel it when you lose track of time making something with your hands. You feel it when you sit around a fire, if you are lucky enough to have one, and just talk. About nothing. About everything. That pull you feel in those moments. That deep exhale. That sense that something long held has finally been put down. That is not nostalgia. That is your ancient brain recognizing something true. A version of your life that it was built for, and it is closer than you think. You set an alarm this morning, and your ancestors, 100,000 years ago, woke up with the light and had nowhere to be. Maybe the question is not how to be more productive. Maybe the question is how to remember what you actually are.